We are live and recording. I want to thank everyone for participating, everyone that's on the Zoom call, everyone that's watching on YouTube or watching after the fact. This is a Seasteading Social, and today we're going to be talking about some alternative forms of governance. I'm going to be hosting the event. My name is John Bush. I've been an activist for going on 2 decades, an entrepreneur, and I myself am concerned with the cause of freedom, and more specifically, how can we get from here to there? And I think exploring alternative, innovative forms of, I prefer to call it social organization over governance, because the root of the word govern means to rule over. And I don't think we have any room for that in a free society. But nonetheless, I think alternative forms of social organization are absolutely important and critical if we are to advance human civilization. I think that there's all sorts of innovation in the tech space, although, you know, the internal combustion engine sure could use some innovation, but I guess Elon Musk is providing that. Everything's innovating and growing and expanding and cutting edge, but we're still relying on this old, archaic, monopolistic institution known as the state as a means of organizing people. And if you're a student of history or political science, then you're probably well aware that this particular institution, the state, which enjoys a geographic monopoly on the initiation of violence, forcing people to do things against their will, creating one set of rules for every single person just by virtue of them being born into a given geographic area, it has a lot of problems. There's a lot of corruption. In fact, it actually stifles innovation and engages in favoritism. So it's a problem. There's people that are working to solve those problems through the political channel, engaging the system itself. And then there's people that rather than compete within the system, they're aiming to compete with the system. And I think that is something that's extremely valuable, and a lot more energy and focus should be shifted there. That's one of the reasons why I'm attracted to the Seasteading Institute and this idea of seasteading, because it gives opportunity to experiment with these alternative forms of social organization or governance. And I know that it's definitely an uphill battle, and we got a long way to go, but I think having these conversations and trying to put them into action is absolutely critical if we are to advance as civilization. Later on in the talk, I'm going to be sharing about the Freedom Cell Network, which is a group of over 20,000 people globally that are participating in a decentralized peer-to-peer means of social organization, mutual aid, achieving common goals. And it's a kind of a operating system for human beings to relate to one another in a peaceful, voluntary way. But before we get to that, we have 2 amazing guests that are going to be joining us today. We're going to be hearing from Tony Olson and John McCone. Both are involved with the Seasteading Institute, and both have some projects on their own that are pretty incredible, and very much looking forward to see them. We're going to do about 15 to 20 minutes of talk. They're going to be presenting, and then after that, we'll open up for Q&A and discussion, ideas, thoughts, cooperation, and collaboration for about 10 minutes. And we hope that you guys leave the event feeling informed and also inspired. Maybe we can do a little networking along the way. All right, well, let's bring on our first presenter is John McCone. In addition to being an ambassador to the Seasteading Institute, McCone is the managing director of Sociabuild. I think I'm pronouncing that right.
Yeah.
Okay, great. A company which aims to increase location value by building up social capital through creating communities which are desirable places to live. He was previously a physicist and a philosophy writer. He's currently working on a project in a farm in Norfolk that aims to increase the material self-sufficiency and resilience of the local community there. He's going to share with us a business plan about how real estate development might be a business model that aligns with profits and the overall good. I was checking out his website. It looks like he's a Henry Georgist, which I think is a pretty cool philosophy that a lot of people subscribe to. There's a lot of opportunity for some equity and still quite a bit of freedom. So without further ado, let's hear from John on this business plan.
Okay. This presentation is about my company, Sociabuild, and its business plan. And like I say, the idea is to, in the same way that sort of you can run a Windows operating system on a Unix machine, or a virtual Unix operating system on a Windows machine, that's kind of the idea of what Sociabuild is, to create sort of a virtual, to create almost a virtual country within a country. Anyway, so yeah, puts it, like the CSIG Institute, the core mission of SocialBuild is to build better societies. Indeed, yeah, that was the reason I became a CSIG ambassador in the first place, because I wanted to create better societies. Since then, I've come across other initiatives like the Charter Cities Institute, which aim to establish legally autonomous special economic zones on land by negotiating treaties with national governments. However, it's very difficult for a small startup company to either construct a floating city on international waters or to negotiate a legally binding international treaty with a government, which is what the Charter Cities Institute is aiming to do. SocialBuild's approach is to start with the minimum viable product of social innovation. What's the lowest risk, lowest cost way to improve the communities where we live? For this reason, I'm positioning SocialBuild as a real estate company with a twist, in that we intend to outsource the business of house construction to other property developers and instead focus on building intangible value in communities, social norms, culture, etc., to make them great places to live. And as you'll see, none of these social capital building activities require us to sign any international treaties with governments. This should greatly simplify the execution. SocialBuild doesn't intend to completely liberate citizens from the laws of their governments initially. We merely aim to incrementally improve the quality of the societies and neighborhoods where people live. If we succeed, we should be able to generate profit and revenue, which we can then bootstrap into progressively more ambitious projects. At the moment, SocialBuild is just a name, a website, a logo, a trademark, and most importantly, a business plan. It just exists on paper for the moment, but I'm going to tell you what the business plan, the vision is here anyway. Here's a question. If one sentence could summarize everything a government should do, what would that one sentence be? I don't know, does anyone want to try and type some guess into the chat box? I don't know, maybe how about this answer? A government should make their territory a nice place to live. You know, really, governments do lots of things, but they should, all the things governments should do, at least should contribute to making the country a nicer place to live. Yeah, that's what government should do. However, since people are willing to pay more money to higher rents to live in nice places, anything that improves the quality of life in the location will also raise land values in that location. This in turn implies that it may be possible for private real estate companies to profitably deliver almost any public service that governments currently provide their citizens. For example, would you consider paying more rent to live somewhere with, for example, complementary healthcare in the event of a health emergency as part included in the rental package, with better roads and infrastructure, where your landlord was contractually bound to provide you with some kind of guaranteed work in the event you became unemployed while you searched for something better, that offered zero interest rates to business loans, business loans to tenants. If so, it might be possible for private real estate companies to use rent premiums to fund what are generally considered to be public services. Private real estate companies might also be able to make use of existing property law and existing contract law in most countries to create what are effectively pseudo jurisdictions. At the most basic level, a jurisdiction is, at the most basic level, the law is a set of behavioral standards which, if not met, will incur a penalty of some kind. And a jurisdiction is the region in space where those behavioral standards apply. Think about how breach of contract works. If I sign a contract committing that in the event that I will do X, and in the event that I don't do X, the contractual term says that I have to pay some kind of reparations to a third party. The very act of signing that one contract is equivalent to moving into a new jurisdiction where there's a fine for not doing X. Furthermore, property law gives property owners a great deal of discretion to let people in or order people to leave their premises. From the perspective of someone who wants to stay on someone else's property, being ordered to leave could be interpreted as a penalty, for example. Imagine a property owner who agreed to host people and perhaps businesses on his property, provided they agreed to adhere to a set of behavioral standards and sign a contract agreeing to meet those standards. This contract could even include terms where fines had to be paid in the event that certain clauses were breached or something like that. Such a property would in effect become a de facto jurisdiction at some level, a region in space where a set of behavioral standards could be enforced that differed significantly from the behavioral standards that applied across the rest of the nation. Obviously, the national law would apply as well, but you could superimpose, just by using property law and contract law, you could superimpose certain modifications anyway. Although the penalties these pseudo jurisdictions could impose would be on those violating the codes would be limited to fines written into the contract or banishment, so to speak. Obviously, property owners couldn't throw people in jail. However, although the nature of these penalties, would be very limited, the circumstances under which the penalties could be applied, in terms of like the conditions under which some kind of reparations or certain things had to be met, could be applied, could be varied from project to project with near limitless flexibility. So there's a lot of scope for modifying the behavioral code in a given privately owned area. It's really the things that it's the circumstances under which penalties apply rather than the nature of the penalties themselves that have the biggest impact on sort of society and the culture that develops. In the big picture, Sociable will build capital, will employ the following strategies to build capital in the communities that we'll hopefully manage in the future. Community curation. The type of people you initially bring into a community has a major effect on the culture and behaviors and just the general kind of environment that develops within that community subsequently. By offering people a good deal, such as maybe 2 years rent-free accommodation, we hope to encourage people to line up to live in our communities, and that will enable us to cherry pick the best applicants. House token monetary policy. Money changes people's behavior. Monetary incentives have a big effect on behavior, and the monetary incentive system will have a big effect on the overall culture and the nature of the society that develops. In the long run, we hope to phase in a local currency enforced through trademark protection laws and backed by the value of our housing stock, which only Sociable can issue and which people can use to pay their rent. Once this is done, it should be relatively straightforward to experiment with all sorts of kind of welfare programs or interest rates or lending schemes and just general monetary policy to see what kind of monetary policy promotes the best interests of the community and creates an environment where people live best and interact with each other most productively, that kind of thing. Providing valuable public goods like healthcare and infrastructure, which I've discussed in a couple of slides ago. Value creating social contracts. Social contracts that commit members not to engage in activities that harm or annoy other members, but at the same time don't interfere too much with people being able to live the kind of life they wish. So those are basically the 4 kind of items in the toolkit that we hope to deploy to create social capital, to create this kind of intangible capital and value in the areas that we manage or set up. One of the most exciting things about using a private real estate company to experiment with building social capital is the market will provide us with rapid feedback as to whether a particular measure creates or destroys value. For example, a monetary policy that reduces prosperity will also reduce rents. If a given contract kind of interferes with the way people want to live their own lives to a greater extent than it promotes civility in the society, then people just won't want to live there, and rents will go down as well. And then the converse will be true if a contract sort of gets people doesn't interfere with people's lives, but also sort of stops people from interfering with each other's lives, then rents will go up. And of course, public services. If we provide a sort of a pseudo public service to the residents of our community, if that public service costs more than the benefit it delivers, then rents and the value of our land holdings will go down. And then conversely, if it delivers more value than it costs, that will cause people to want to move there, and rents will go up. Hence, by monitoring the value of our land holdings, we can determine whether we're going in the right direction or the wrong direction. And in the event that a given action pushes rents or land values in the wrong direction, we can adjust our policies accordingly. I'm showing you this slide to remind you just how much money is at stake here. As an asset class, Savills estimates that the total value of global real estate is almost as large as the total value of every other financial asset in the world put together. And no single other asset class even comes close to the total value of global real estate. It's important to note that when I talk about the value of global real estate, I'm not talking about the value of space. What we're really talking about is the value of social capital. What we really mean is the value of social capital located within a given region of space. Job opportunities, law and order, services, facilities, etc., etc. If you look at this graph, you can see that this chart, you can see that the vast majority of global real estate is residential. When you consider that over 50% of the world's population, about 50% of the world's population, live in cities that occupy less than 3% of the land surface of planet Earth, it's really clear that land value is very different from land area, and land value, in fact, is concentrated. Most of the land value on planet Earth is concentrated on really just a few percent of the actual land area of planet Earth. For example, an acre in Avenue Road in London, particularly sort of fashionable street in London, an acre in Avenue Road in London costs £30 million. When you compare that with the average acre of UK farmland, which costs £6,690, you can see there's a really big difference depending on the location you are talking about. And if you want to purchase an acre of boreal forest in northern Canada, that will only set you back $200. I think it's only $200, in fact. So there's huge amounts of land out there that are very cheap, and there's certain locations where land is just through the roof. What this means in practice is that even if Sociobuild only managed to acquire 1 or 2% of the land surface on planet Earth by purchasing, say, large tracts of remotely located land, the company could still achieve valuations in excess of £100 trillion. Provided that we succeeded in developing high densities of social capital on the land we acquired. Now, this is obviously a really extremely optimistic scenario, maybe even unlikely, but it's not beyond the realm of possibility. I mean, we're going after, essentially what I'm trying to do with Sociobuild is I'm trying to achieve a company that can actually produce very high densities of social capital. That's the mission anyway. So yeah. The ultimate goal of the Sea Sitting Institute is to create societies at sea. A lot of the emphasis is on addressing the challenges of living at sea, building structures, growing food, providing energy for floating habitations. Sociobuild, the sole focus of Sociobuild is to create social, cultural, and normative environments in communities that produce the best possible lifestyle for their inhabitants. Combining security with prosperity and an abundance of stimulating social activities. For this reason, I intend to start on land, where the basic material problems to do with living have already been solved. Having said that, Sociobuild's business model can be applied anywhere that real estate can be purchased. So if it ever becomes possible to purchase real estate at sea, it will also be possible to start Sociobuild communities at sea. Thank you for listening. Any questions? Should I unshare my screen now?
Yeah, if you would.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Is it possible for the people who are renting to be the people who help fund the actual purchasing of the real estate? So as to like they might have like a credit union in common where they set a certain interest rate where they communally support the growing of that particular area and community.
I suppose that's possible. Yeah. I've actually thought about making the company charter of Sociobuild, creating a company charter in Sociobuild that allows where like people who own more than say 2% of the company, shareholders who own more than 2% of the company can get, can essentially get rent-free accommodation in any of the communities, and that would actually be I think that would actually be a really good way for people to diversify against governments going wrong in their area. Because if you have the ability, if Sociable becomes a multinational company and has communities all over the place, then if you're a shareholder potentially, and that's kind of one of the perks of being a shareholder, then you can basically have a home anywhere in the world, well, over multiple countries. Hello?
Yeah, exactly. That's I'm sorry, I apologize.
Well, if it would be only 50 that would have it that time, I guess. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I suppose ultimately, to a certain extent, the company is going to evolve according to demand, and probably I would imagine that particular projects could be organized that way. I'm not sure we'd organize all the projects in the same way, though. I think, I've been involved in seasteading for a long time, so I value I value diversity. So I think probably maybe some projects could be run along those lines, and other projects could be run along different lines.
We have a question from Dominic. Go ahead, Dominic.
Yeah, so what I'd be interested to know is whether Sociable is considering setting up kind of its own legal system or judicial structure of any kind that would go with the social capital it is building, or whether it plans to rely upon the legal system and judicial systems provided by national governments.
Oh, well, the answer to that question is contracts. I think at least for some of our communities, I intend to have a situation where, in order to be a member of the community, you have to sign a contract. So, and the rental contract will contain all sorts of terms, and those terms may involve certain reparations if you do something, and certain other things. So, I would say that the legal systems, when I talk about legal systems, it's only going to be payment systems. We're not going to be throwing anyone in jail. I mean, only the government can throw people in jail, but you can actually use contract law in many countries to create sort of pseudo legal systems, shall we say, that that apply to all the people who signed the contract.
What I was kind of thinking was that what system would then be used to determine whether or not someone has broken the terms of the contract and therefore has to pay the reparations? Would that be ultimately settled in a court of law run by the national government or a private system?
I think it would probably be run by the national government. Maybe you could do it with a private system. That's certainly not how I'd start, because basically I want to do something. I want to start off with a project that is very simple and doesn't require us to sign an international treaty with governments. I want to do a system that you can just legally. I want to have a sort of a community development system that you can just legally sort of run in any country, and creating a new court. I mean, I guess maybe you could come up with an agreement with the national government to start private courts and stuff like that. Maybe even private courts are legal in some countries, so I suppose that would be possible. But yeah, it might be possible in the future. But the thing I'd initially think about would just be writing up a contract and applying the contract in national courts.
I suppose it kind of depends. Like in the UK, national courts are quite efficient, so there might not be much to be gained from using a private system. But in some countries where the legal system is very slow and cumbersome, it might be very attractive to have an alternative built into the as part of the social capital.
This is a great discussion, but we have 2 more questions we need to get to. So let's go to Stephen's question. Thank you, Dominic.
Hi, sorry, who was it? Who was next?
You are next, Stephen. Go ahead.
Oh, great. Yeah, thank you, John. I wanted to ask about the sort of transition model of social capital, because when we're looking at, say, for example, a different context, agreements like climate change agreements or technology diffusion, another one, what we tend to see in ecosystems, economies and so forth, meaning is that we first of all have a period of experimental learning where lots of people try lots of different things. And then we find, so for example, different people setting up eco-villages, different personality types, different structures of how people should get on. And after that system of experimentation, we find some parts of that work really well. And from that, we then diffuse that system out, because the things that work well, create benefits from the people that participate. And then after you've done that, you set up what you might call contracts. So the contracting tends to be the latest stage, once the process of establishing what works and then propagating that works, what works either within a community or externally. So I wanted to ask you to what extent you have plans to either do some learning yourself or to draw upon other people's learning in the creation of your first sort of community. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I think generally, I talked about these various different methods, but yeah, if I can find like for example, I suppose there's all this directory of intentional communities out there, and it would be interesting to find a successful intentional community that wanted to expand its model, like maybe a successful intentional community that had a desire to expand its model. Because some of them are just single projects, they want to live on their own, and that they're happy with that. But maybe some want to expand their models, and then saying, well, if we get some financing, we can help you expand. If we believe they're genuinely providing value and they'll push up land values and stuff like that, it would be interesting to talk about that as well. I think that the lowest hanging fruit is actually community curation. Drawing up legal contracts requires lawyers, which are expensive. So I think the lowest hanging fruit is just bringing people together into an area with some kind of a more fuzzy kind of brand type thing. But I definitely intend to sort of progress to contracts at some point. It's definitely something I'm thinking of exploring, and monetary policy and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, so I mean, yeah, we don't have to do contracts off the bat, but it's one of the toolkits that I'm sort of thinking about, at least in the long term, when it comes to building social capital.
And let's get to Jeff's question, and then no more questions for John McCone until the end of the discussion. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, John, for the presentation. I sort of want to echo Mike's comments on the chat, that this is a really cool application of anarcho-capitalism to Georgism. And I don't know if you agree with that characterization, but that's what it seems like externally. Other point is, I don't know how popular private arbitration is in the UK. Maybe it's not very common, but it's pretty popular in the US, and it works quite well. Maybe your courts are really good, our courts are not, and private arbitration a lot of times works much better. Third thing is really a question, and that is Georgism presupposes that land is a limited commodity, that it has value existing beforehand that was not created by people and so on, and tries to find a way to kind of enhance and distribute that value. How does doing this on land, how does doing this on the ocean with seasteading differ from doing it on the land, where with seasteading you're creating the land, it doesn't pre-exist, it can be sort of a commercial property in and of itself. So real estate on the ocean is not the same as real estate on the land. And how does your thinking differ potentially differ on the ocean?
Well, the thing about Georgism is, the interesting thing about Georgism, there's kind of two components to Georgism. There's one component where there is pre-existing wealth that has nothing to do with human beings, and that would be just sort of things like oil resources or coal seams and things like that. That if you have two coal seams, one's deep down and one's quite shallow, and two different people own the mineral rights to it, then the person who's got the shallow coal seam is going to be making a lot more profit than the person who's got the deep coal seam, because they're going to have to put more money in. And where did that value come from? That's just natural. But there's another element to Georgism that although the value, a lot of the value of land comes from human activity, that the people who capture the value of land often aren't the same people who contribute to the value of land. For example, if you live in an area and you have a sort of a messed up house, like let's say you have live in an area and you have a rundown house. If all your neighbors paint their houses, the value of your house might go up just because the location gets better. So basically, the idea of Georgism is that quite a lot of the value in the community gets that it is not captured by the people who produce that value. And in the seasteading, and I think in that sense, Georgism would actually apply to seasteads as well. Yes, nobody exists in the first place, but as more and more people come together, the community that becomes a seastead will have location value. People, if you've got a really, let's say you've got a really cool seastead with loads of people sort of doing all sorts of things, and then you have another seastead that's kind of got a bit of crime problem and stuff like that. People are going to want to pay to dock to the really cool seastead where there's lots of like action going on, and everyone's making money and having fun and that kind of stuff, rather than the sort of rundown seastead where there's crime and all sorts of social problems. So I think communities at sea may well get location value as well as communities at land, and what I want to do as Sociobuild, I actually want to build up that location value, and then sort of charge rent in local currency, and then I'm actually interested in paying the rent back in the form of a universal basic income, just redistributing the rents collected as universal basic income. And the cool thing is, if it's in our own currency, it's fine. The company can do that forever and ever and ever. Obviously, if the company pays it in national currency, it runs out of money very quickly. But if the company does it in its own currency, then it never runs out of money. And I think that could be done at sea as well as land, because a lot of it's not just natural value; it's also about agglomeration of people.
Excellent.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, great discussion. Thank you so much for sharing your work with us, John, and excited to see all the progress that you're making. Some great discourse and a lot of ideas are shared, and all good things. Okay, our next speaker is the founder of Freedom Haven, an open design, freedom-based seasteading micronation that aims to help folks, especially libertarians, it seems, find freedom from oppressive governments, which I think is a very noble cause, especially in this day and age. The seasteads are one of the last frontiers here on Earth. So it's cool to see people that are actually moving the ball down the field towards making this a reality. And I know it's difficult and there's all sorts of challenges, but the more people we have that are taking massive action towards this end, I think the more likely it'll actually happen. So without further ado, let's hear from Tony Olson, who's going to share about his project, Freedom Haven.
Thank you. Carly, I don't have a presentation. I thought I was just going to do a discussion, raise my hand and ask a couple questions and present my point. Freedom Haven is going to be a collection of seasteads. We're actually designing also one really big city block structure, be kind of like a mega container ship, but it's actually like more like a city. But what sets this seastead apart, and also the seastead will be outside the exclusive economic zone, so the legal jurisdiction of any existing country in the world. So there'll be no legal jurisdiction there. But most people who seek to do something like that want there to be no laws, no rules, no nothing. And what sets Freedom Haven apart is that we actually, even though each individual seastead will have their own rules and own way of dealing with things, there is a unifying constitution that all those seasteads in that area will be built on. And this seems to be kind of going against the grain. So at my presentation, I was asked to explain why it is that Freedom Haven will actually have an underlying constitution that everyone who goes there will have to agree to before you even go into that community, because that seems to be very unusual. Most of my friends, libertarians, they call themselves anarchists, and Freedom Haven itself will look like an anarchy because the government is so incredibly small that most people will say there is no government. I don't see any government. There's no president. I mean, yeah, we have courts, and yeah, there are officers to protect people from pirates and cartels and stuff. But for the most part, there's no government, and people are kind of just doing whatever they want. So for all intents and purposes, people call it an anarchy. But I disagree on a technical basis, on a technicality, because we actually are based on law, and we actually have a constitution as a basis for our society. So the question is why? So that's what this presentation is basically about. So I can see all you guys here, at least a third of you guys, just a lot of big group. First of all, Question, raise of hands. How many here are looking for a location where they want more government and they want more controls, versus how many here want to have less government and less controls and more freedom? Who wants to have more government, more controls, more services, promises, everything's gonna be better because government's gonna make it better? How many of those do we have here? Okay, how many here want more freedom, less government, less controls? I don't see anybody answering any of these questions. Oh yeah, there, thank you. Okay, good. I wanted to understand who my audience was before I, so why do we have a constitution? Why do we have any rules at all? Because a lot of people just say, just making an anarchy. The technicality. How many of us have participated in a fire drill before? Kind of rudimentary question. I'm pretty sure everyone here has participated in a fire drill, right? Now, how many here have actually had to flee from a burning building before? I'm sure there might be one or two here, but have any of you guys ever actually fled from a burning building before? No? Okay, I can't see everybody, but the ones I can see is no one in there. We understand the importance of preparing for emergencies, even those emergencies that might never occur. Sometimes the preparation itself helps to actually prevent that emergency from happening. How many of us have an emergency supply of food? How about fuel, or have a bug out bag, bug out car, or even a bug out boat? You have to prepare for the emergencies that we hope will never happen, but just in case. How many of us have taken self-defense training of some sorts in the hopes that it would help us if we were ever attacked by a murderer, rapist, or thief? Well, not that many. Most people, how about regarding your seastead? Do you think it's important to have self-defense plan for your seastead or for your home? Yeah. Most people would avoid violent confrontations if at all possible. But out on the ocean, we may not always have we may not always be the fastest thing on the water, so fleeing is not always an option. Some people fancy themselves as pacifists. By pacifists, I mean someone who would lay down their lives rather than defend themselves against an attacker. It means that they would, in no cases, ever use force, ever take someone else's life, ever kidnap anybody. That's true and ultimate pacifist. I have a number of friends who fancy themselves as those kinds of pacifists, but when it comes down to it, like pretty much all people, they'd be willing to defend themselves. When it comes down to it, if someone's trying to kill you, murder you, kidnap you, whatever it is, you would resist. So in that sense, most people would defend themselves against a murderer, kidnapper, or thief. But what happens when two people disagree on when using force for self-defense is justified or not? What if one person believes they are being attacked and start using force, defensive force, but others don't think such force is justified? Haven't all murderers, kidnappers, and thieves already justified the use of force in their own mind? Don't they already think that what they're doing is justified and it's okay? So there already is the agreement. The fact that there's murderers, kidnappers, or thieves, people are already in disagreement about when to use force. We consider such scenarios. When considering such scenarios, it's easy to understand how a small fist fight in a bar could easily blow into a full-blown melee. I can never pronounce that right. That involves the entire bar. And this is actually the reason for having a constitution. While if the goal is peace, then the goal should also be to de-escalate such violent situations as quickly as possible, and it is unwise to wait until the heat of the battle to make such plans. While most people's goal is never to have to deal with violence and to live peacefully with all people they encounter, if you are ever in a situation where self-defense is needed and necessary, how would you want it to end? Would you want it to escalate into something that encompasses all of your neighbors? Haven't wars been started like this? I mean, can you imagine how a conflict could very easily escalate and involve everybody and just keeps getting bigger and bigger until you have a full-blown civil war or some kind of huge violent mob or other kind of violence? We would want to de-escalate the situation as fast as possible while preserving life, freedom, and property. Of course, we don't want to, of course, we would want to have our peace restored as quickly as possible and to have the minimal amount of force used as possible while still preserving your life, freedom, and property. But how do we want it to be handled? With the strongest person asserting their will of the situation? Do we want might makes right? What if everyone in the community agreed ahead of time of when self-defense was and wasn't justified and how to handle the situation to de-escalate it? Wouldn't you end up with more cooperation and collaboration from your community in preventing the violence from ever happening? Wouldn't murderers, kidnappers, and thieves be more likely to stay clear if it was clearly defined what would happen to them if they tried to murder, kidnap, or steal in your community? We are not pure pacifists. I want to continue living, not be kidnapped, and not have my property stolen or destroyed. I would use self-defense if needed to prevent murder, kidnapping, and theft. How many here would also use that self-defense in that same way? Yeah. In a world plagued by the existence of murderers, kidnappers, and thieves, ultimately we have to choose between two options. Do we want to spin the roulette wheel and see who ends up as king of the hill carrying the biggest stick, the toughest kid on the playground? Or do we want to be ruled by rules we have established with each other ahead of time on when and how self-defense force can be used and how to deal with it once it's come up and find out who's guilty and innocent and basically have a basic premise in society of when such force is used? Organic growth in a community is beautiful and essential for a free market to thrive. But there is no free market when you are oppressed by a murderer, kidnapper, or thief. And you need to be prepared to defend yourself, ideally with your neighbors, so that your stick will be large enough to dissuade such attacks. So how do we do this? Most of us agree that government is a monster. But few people recognize the seeds of that very same monster inside themselves whenever they are using lethal force against someone else. Even if that force is in self-defense and is totally justified, it is still force. And these actions are the seeds of the next tyrannical government. It doesn't mean that's wrong. It may still be justified. It still may be the right thing to do. But you have to realize the danger of the precedent that you're setting. As soon as you establish yourself in a community to defend against an external attack, you guys have organized yourself into a group to defend your community. Isn't that government? At what point does it become government? How big does it need to be? As long as force exists, justified or unjustified, you will end up with a government. This is why I believe that anarchy cannot ever exist in a world where murderers, kidnappers, or thieves exist. Yes, anarchy can exist for a time until the murderer, kidnapper, or thief shows up. Some people point out that Somalia, where they recognize government has collapsed, they call that an anarchy. And yet people are threatened with murder, kidnapping, and theft and are ruled by warlords. Are the people free? Are the people free if they are dead or kidnapped? Do you really see an absence of government there? Or is it instead just the fact that most people don't recognize those Somalian governments as legitimate? Somalia is not an anarchy. It is just a group of governments that we are taught not to see as governments, and yet they are there and the people are oppressed. George Washington was attributed having said, government is not reason, it is not eloquent, it is force. Like fire, it is a dangerous servant and a fearful master. Isn't this true? Isn't government force? Isn't everything it does founded on the laws that are in force under the threat of force? Isn't an arrest a form of kidnapping under threat of death? Isn't taxation a form of theft? So what is government? It's a common misconception that government stops being government if it's small enough or if it isn't recognized by other countries. But when does the cancer stop being cancer? Even if it's just one single cancerous cell, isn't it still cancer, albeit a small amount of it? Think of a country in the world today, I'm asking for everyone to do this, think of a country in the world today where where you believe it has an oppressive tyrannical government. I don't want to list any specific countries because I don't want to get into a debate about which country was or wasn't one. But everyone just take a minute and think about a country that you would consider a tyrannical country. Okay? Does everyone have one? Okay. Would it stop being government if you were to cut that government in half? Let's say now suddenly the government's half as big. Would it still be government? What do you guys think? I mean, it'd still be government, right? Yeah. What if it was 1% of the original size? And I'm sure in this tyrannical government, people would celebrate and say, yeah, that's great because, you know, it's only one. Yeah, government is government. It's not relevant. Exactly. It would still be government. What if it was cut down to a single police officer or soldier that went around enforcing all the government's previous laws as much as he could? Would it still be government? How about if that police officer or soldier only did this thing one day each year? On that day, wouldn't the people start calling it Government Day? Doesn't government exist whenever anything is being enforced under the threat of killing, kidnapping, or destruction or theft? Does that apply regardless of how small or how short of a time it exists? Yes, it's still government. So how do we handle laws then? Robert Higgs was attributed to having said, there is no law so trivial that the government would not kill you in order to enforce it. This is why I believe that the only laws that should exist are those few things that can sometimes justify the use of force, up to and possibly including lethal force. So think about it for a second. What situations, what scenarios would you think could, in any situation, justify killing someone else? And that's a pretty graphic, that's a pretty extreme situation, but seriously think about it. It's easy to pass laws that other people have to enforce. But if you had to enforce it, when would you feel justified going over to your neighbor's house, breaking down their door, and shooting them? When would you feel justified doing that? I mean, that's pretty extreme. In Freedom Haven, you may not murder, you may not kidnap, and related concepts. You wouldn't ever. You would never. That was Dominic. So Dominic, you would never use lethal force against anybody ever. I was waiting for Dominic to respond, but maybe. Yeah, this circumstance does dictate response. So basically, the only laws in this Constitution, Freedom Haven Constitution, are essentially that you may not murder, you may not kidnap or related concepts, and you may not steal and related concepts. So basically, this also includes rape, which is kind of a combination of stealing someone else's body and kidnap. So, for example, so it's kidnap is an expanded concept, and so is stealing. And you're only justified in using the minimal self-defense, the defensive force needed to stop murderers, kidnappers, and thieves. The U.S. Constitution is the longest standing constitution of any country in the world today. Despite its imperfections, I believe that this is the result of the Constitution defining the limitations of this inevitable monster that is government, that would always exist, and instead opts to require that it remain chained, limited, and small. After 2.5 centuries, the resulting monster in the US government has grown and partially broken free, but it did so much more slowly than its counterparts in any other country. Freedom Haven has drafted its own constitution, which it hopes will define and limit the monster of government in such a way that it would be established, that it would establish freedom that lasts even longer than the US Constitution. If you're interested, come read the Constitution at freedomhaven.org. Our hopes is that it would preserve the peace of Freedom Haven by having everyone on the same page regarding when they might be threatened by someone else, when they can, or when they are justified using force, essentially. Yes. So thanks for your attention. Any questions?
I had a comment right quick. I appreciate the presentation and the sentiment and that you are doing. There's so much talk in this world, and the action, I think, is really what's important. So thanks for doing that. There's one thing that I recognize. I actually got this from Stefan Molyneux, who I'm not such a big fan of anymore, but back in the day, he had some great stuff. But he pointed out that it was the relative economic freedom allowed in the United States of America, that the relative economic freedom coupled with a parasitic state that has an income tax and all sorts of taxing mechanisms in addition to the Federal Reserve. It was that combination that created an environment where the United States of America was able to rise up to one of the most abhorrent empires that the world has ever seen, very sophisticated in its reach, empire of bases through the military, and a financial empire through the central banking and the International Monetary Fund, which is global, but it's also part of the Anglo-American establishment. So I just wanted to point that out, this challenge when it's kind of hard to play both, to have that economic freedom, but also have a central government that's able to leech a percentage of that economic freedom.
There's no taxation in Freedom Haven. We do this in a sense because at the federal level, or what we call the federal level, at the Freedom Haven level, there is no government. There's just a constitution that everyone has agreed to implement in their own seasteads at that level. And the constitution is specific enough so people know, in a sense, that is the only law at the federal level. People at the local seasteading level can have as many laws or fees or fines or whatever they want. If they want to implement some kind of crazy socialism or communism, that's their choice. But all they can do for people who break their laws is to kick them out. They may not arrest them, they may not kidnap them or kill them just for breaking their rules. The only time that anybody in all Freedom Haven can kill anybody else is in self-defense of life, freedom, and property. They basically stop murder, kidnapping, and theft. And the Constitution goes in specific to define what these mean, because the words themselves mean different things to different people. But actually, like 2/3 of the Constitution is nothing more than just explaining what we mean when we say the words.
Cool.
We had a question from Alexis. Oh, I'm sorry. Alexis had his hand raised, so if we could let Alexis go first.
Okay, sure.
Okay.
Hi, what about Catalonia?
I'm not familiar with Catalonia. Tell me about it.
Catalonia had, were it not for Franco's regime stepping in, so that instance, I agree. Catalonia had a higher quality of life than Spain, than that portion of Spain previously had, and it was run under anarchy.
Oh, yes, Catalonia in Spain. Yes. I'm not familiar with their history as much. I actually had a Spanish teacher that was from that location. Yeah, I can't speak to that much.
Okay.
Hugh, go ahead and ask your question.
Yeah, well, I just recently published a paper called the Cultural Level Quotient. And you can find out which culture level you belong to in the paper. And basically what you people talk about here, for seasteading, it's supposed to be a new country. And, you are at the level of John Locke. Okay, before John Locke, there were St. Augustine. Okay, John Locke, after John Locke, there's Milton Friedman. Nobody seems to understand Milton Friedman. Okay.
I love Milton Friedman.
Yeah, grandfather of Patrick Friedman, but nobody seems to understand what he's really trying to say. He's trying to tell people there should not be any man-made laws. Okay, that's his objective in his life. His dream is to create a money-oriented society. But after Milton Friedman, there's Kenneth Arrow, there's Gerald de Brue, John von Neumann. And these people say we can mathematically describe economy. So they are the mathematical economists. Okay, but they didn't solve any problem. And, Paul Science, which I'm the founder, came out and solved the problem of value posed by Gerald de Brue. So you are several levels away from what we are trying to say. Okay, basically you should understand Milton Friedman. If Milton Friedman said there should not be any man-made law, if you can understand that, then you see a different picture. What you are talking is still John Locke, who's trying to propose a government based on what happened after French Revolution. There's no more kings and emperors. You need to have a new system. The new system called republic. Okay, so the United States, a republic, that's the most advanced government system in the world. installed in a new, establishing in a new world. Do you see this? The world culture move from new world to new world to new world to new world. Okay, the last new world is the United States. Okay, it's really supposed to be a country without government, without leader, without kings and emperor. Okay, but that's very old. That's 200-300 years ago. Milton Friedman already come out to say, you know, we shouldn't have a man-made laws.
In a sense, freedom havens, according to the traditional way people see governments, which is that a government doesn't exist until it's a certain size, and unless you have a king or a president, whatever, you don't have a government. People will look at freedom haven and say there is no government. We have no man-made laws.
Okay,
good. The only reason that we're consider ourselves a government is because we've changed, or we use a definition of government that most people would. It's not traditional. It's not the way people would see it. Basically, like I said, if you're using force, if you're compelling anybody, if someone's trying to break into your house and they're initiating force and you arrest them, you handcuff them, you get them in control, that person sees you as government in that situation because you are enforcing your will on him, even though he started it, and even though you're doing the complete right thing in your self-defense. He initiated it, but you overcame, and he is now your slave in a sense. For that moment, you've captured him, and you can throw him out or whatever you want to do because you have complete control of the situation. You are government in that situation, and that's the way Freedom Haven sees government. And only because of that definition does Freedom Haven have a government. We just all agree on when we're going to use force and when we're not going to use force, and all be on the same page. So no one's going to surprise and out of the blue use force or violence when no one else can see it coming. We're all on the same page of when we're actually going to do that, and that's it. So in a sense, according to the world, they see us as an anarchy. Well, but we do have a foundation of a government that no one else probably would see as a government except for us.
Yeah, you see, you're talking. The name of your organization is Freedom Haven. You see, freedom, which the word government, the concept of government is pretty much over in the United States. Okay, John Locke said we have no more kings and but we need something. So basically, the government, the idea of having or not having government is over. Now we talk about freedom. Okay, the question is, do we have complete freedom? According to Milton Friedman, he thinks we should have complete freedom. So we should have anarchy. Okay.
I want to have the greatest amount of. I want to have the greatest amount of freedom possible. The problem is.
No, you see, let me ask you: are human beings allowed to behave freely? Yes or no? Answer me.
You may not murder. You are not free to murder.
Answer me yes or no.
Are we free right now?
Milton Friedman thinks we should be allowed to behave freely, because we shouldn't make any man-made laws. Then the only other choice is to have total freedom. Okay, I ask you the question: do we have freedom?
We don't have freedom right now. No.
Freely?
We don't have freedom right now. No.
Okay, so in science, I'm a scientist. I'm a physicist, mathematician, philosopher. Okay, in freedom, in physics, all physical objects regulated by laws of nature, non-viable laws of nature. There's no freedom in physics. Okay. In social science, we believe there's no freedom in human behavior because we are all constrained by some kind of mathematical constraint on our behavior. Okay, so you probably stand for freedom and I stand for no freedom. Okay, so it's totally distinct two positions.
Hey, Hugh, I'd like to interrupt. Let's get a couple more questions in here. I appreciate your sentiment and the conversation, but let's get a couple more questions here before we move on to the next segment. Does anyone else have a question?
I love questions.
Go ahead. We can hear you.
Okay. Well, so basically we are talking about do we have freedom or we don't have freedom?
Excuse me. I have a sort of a question, like a suggestion that I would like to add to the conversation. So in essence, when we are we are joining a voluntary community, like in a government, the we lose this concept like this person talked about, like we lose freedom because the laws which are made by the government, we don't actually get a direct say in the creation of these laws. The so-called representatives who handle us carry out those laws. So like, what if in a sea state, like just like the person described, like we have voluntary contracts with each other that we agree beforehand, that we do not participate in these stuff in order for the betterment of the sea state. So we have a voluntary say. So we already have volunteered to participate in that contract. So in that basis, we could have a sort of like, it's not man-made laws. It's a mutual agreement that nobody will carry out these acts like murder or something like that.
Mhm.
And everybody will agree on themselves any consequences for that actions.
In essence, that's exactly what Freedom Haven is. The only exception to that is, like, for example, if a pirate vessel attacks, or our cartel, and they start opening fire on the seabed and taking it out, in that situation, we would not respect their freedom to kill us. We're seeking the greatest amount of freedom that we believe is possible. And unfortunately, you're not free if you're dead. You're not free if you're kidnapped. And you're also, even though this is less understood, you're also not free if everything you've built and created gets destroyed or stolen. So life, liberty, and property, basically. So those are the only situations where you can force your will on someone else, or basically stop them from forcing their will on you, basically. Outside of that, outside of the no murder, kidnapping, and thieves and steal, everything else is available. You guys can come up with your own agreements and have voluntary exchanges for everything. But if you are a murderer, kidnapper, or thief, you will not be welcome inside the community. And if you try to murder, kidnap, or a thief, people will use force to stop you. And that's the only exception. That's the only freedom that Freedom Haven does not give you, and that is, you may not murder, kidnap, or steal. Outside of that, you have as much as you want possible. And the idea is that if you did have freedom to murder, kidnap, and steal, you would actually have less freedom than you would if you restricted those three. So those are the only three things that you can't in community unless you agree on that.
Right on. All right. Well, thank you so much for sharing these ideas with us, Tony. I think everyone got a lot out of it. Okay, cool. Well, something that came to mind is the law of equal liberty, this idea that our freedom extends up until the point where it violates someone else's freedom, which I think is a noble thought. I'm going to share with you guys about a social organization that I founded back in 2014 and 2015. And, you know, somebody explained anarcho-capitalism like this. I prefer to be more of an anarchist or voluntarist, but anarcho-capitalism is great. But he talked about having an anarcho-capitalist operating system, like on a computer, the slate, the operating system is anarcho-capitalist. And from there, different types of societies and social organizations and rule books could emerge. And as long as everyone respected the autonomy of these individual groups or geographic areas, then we could have relative peace. Of course, everyone wants to come and steal and marauder and rape and pillage. That's where things become a problem. But I really appreciate the experimentation. And at the end of the day, we don't exactly know what the best system might be, because one of the best ways of learning if something works or doesn't work is to test it. And in the given political construct that we find ourselves in, oftentimes it's difficult to do that. We saw what happened with Chad and Nadia when they went and experimented off the coast of Thailand. But I think the important thing is to continue and to persist. So I want to share with you about this concept that I came up with back in 2014, 2015 called Freedom Cells. You can visit our website, freedomcells.org, and that's cells as in the cell of a body, although freedom does sell as well. And essentially, we have 20,000 people that are all cooperating together, over 20,000 people globally, to support one another through mutual aid and working on common goals. The Freedom Cell idea is basically an open source operating system for social organization. Different political philosophies can take it to different entities. It can be folks working together to buy a piece of property. It can be a business. It can even be a political lobbying group. Although most of the folks that are involved tend to be more anarchist, voluntarist, self-sufficient, more self-conscious and self-aware of where things are in the world today. So the idea all centers around what we call an inter-cadre group. So the goal is to find 7 or 8 like-minded people to work with, to set common goals, to collaborate together, to meet up regularly, and to support one another, to engage in mutual defense or mutual aid. And we choose this number 8 because of the research by this guy named Bob Podolsky and John David Garcia. They found that 8 people is the optimal number of people for maximum creativity. And what we're trying to do through the network is to create, to criticize through creation. So you get together with approximately 8 people, work on common goals. We encourage folks to start with goals centered around preparedness, to have a few months worth of food storage set aside. I used to say 2 weeks, and then COVID happened, and I personally had to tap into my food storage. So have a few months worth of food storage. And of course, that's made easier when you have a group of people. You can all chip in and get bulk discounts for food storage, or you guys can share seeds with one another and help. This guy's got the chicken farm over here. We have the garden over here with the vegetables. So food storage, having an encrypted means of communication or an off-grid communication like ham radio is extremely valuable. Folks can learn how to use firearms safely and proficiently in defense of themselves, their family, or their community. Sometimes we get pushback, so I just want to make it clear, if you're not a fan of firearms or guns, none of this is like mandatory. These are just ideas that I like to share and promote, but I recognize that being a global movement, some people are like, hey, wait a second, man, I'm in Switzerland or I'm in Sweden and we can't do guns like you guys do in the United States, which is fine. Some people, like pacifism was brought up earlier, by any means. These are just suggestions. Another goal is to have a bug out plan, where if something were to happen in your community, or there's a natural disaster or civil unrest, you and your group can either go somewhere together or you go somewhere separately. You just have a plan together. These are just some core starting points. However, from there, there's folks that are working together in these groups to buy property and do an intentional community. There's parents that are working together so they can pull their kids out of government schools and homeschool and form a little cooperative. And they set goals like, we'll chip in and get a homeschool curriculum. Sally and Joe will take the kids and educate them on Monday and Wednesday. Sue and Bob will do it on Tuesday and Thursday. There's spiritual goals, folks that get together for yoga and meditation. There's success, entrepreneurial goals, forming a mastermind, right? So it all centers around this inter-cadre group. But then we expand from there and we have 8 groups of 8 that work together cooperatively. So imagine you have your inter-cadre group. This is who you spend the most time with, you work with the most intimately and directly. These are the folks that you trust the most. You work on projects together. But then you link up with 7 other groups in your particular area to form what we call a middle cadre. In Central Texas, for example, we have regularly been meeting just about every month, and there's about 60 people that show up. And this is the Central Texas Middle Cadre group. And within this group, there's smaller inter-cadre groups, and there's some lone wolf folks that haven't joined up with an inter-cadre yet. But then we take it a step further from there and we link up the middle cadre groups. So for example, here in the great state of Texas, there's a large group in Dallas-Fort Worth, there's a large group in Houston, and there's a large group in Central Texas. So we link up the different middle cadre groups, which have approximately 64 people or 8 groups of 8. Doesn't have to be exact, and it never is, but we try to strive towards the number 8 because it's a great number for creativity. You link up the middle cadre groups, and now you have what we call a meta cadre. And the beauty of this organizational structure is that it allows for the scaling of participants to scale in number, but it remains horizontal. So in institutions and organizations and enterprises, you can either organize horizontally, where everyone is on an equal footing, there isn't hierarchy, or you can organize vertically, like a government, where you have the president and really have the little puppet string pullers and social engineers that are controlling them, and multinational corporations, but you have a hierarchy there. Or a corporation, for example, you have the shareholders and the board of directors and the CEO and the management and the employees on all the way down the line. That's hierarchical. We find horizontal institutions to honor freedom more, to never take on an element of bureaucracy, which can get in the way of innovation and progress. And so we formed this social network. We have over 20,000 people. This can be utilized for a seastead if they want to have this type of organization, for a business structure to be ran as a cooperative even. A lot of people are finding a lot of value. Most of the folks in our network are very concerned with some of the changes that we've been seeing in the world today, specifically centering around this Great Reset concept. I'm not sure if everyone's familiar with the Great Reset. It's a marketing plan essentially by the World Economic Forum and other large globalist institutions that aims to reshape civilization as we know it. They want to reshape the relationship between the individual and government. They're big fans of big government. They want to see a return of big government, progressivism on steroids, essentially. They want to reshape the relationship between consumer and business, the relationship between government and consumer. They want to roll out what they're calling stakeholder capitalism, where the value isn't in profits or in benefiting shareholders. It's in benefiting all the stakeholders in the community, which sounds nice and peachy. And they say that their ends are to improve the environment and to help lift people out of poverty. But it's the oligarch class that's rolling out this agenda. And there's a lot much more to it than just helping the environment or lifting people out of poverty. A big component, one of the problems here is they say that we have stakeholders, and one of the stakeholders is the environment, they say, right? I'm concerned with the environment as well, but then they apply these values like the Sustainable Development Goals, Agenda 2030, United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And some of these values have this more egalitarian tone to them, and the sustainability want to roll out cap and trade, carbon tax programs. And a lot of this is about control. And you can see that because of this fourth industrial revolution that's communicated by this gentleman, Klaus Schwab, and the World Economic Forum, where they essentially want to merge technology and biology, not just human beings, but all biology and all biodiversity on Earth. There's a huge element of surveillance and control to this fourth industrial revolution. In fact, there's a paradox. I'm a big fan of decentralized blockchain technology because I think it has a lot of liberating properties to it: privacy, controlling your money, controlling your information, not relying on trusting third parties or centralized institutions. But the fourth industrial revolution also has a lot to do with digital blockchain identity, tokens that allow you to engage in commerce, tokens that allow you to go through a certain geospatial area. So this whole fourth industrial revolution has a lot of concerns. And as a result of it, what we're pushing for is a greater reset to deal with environmental problems, societal problems, poverty. We want to see more decentralization rather than centralization. And I'm sure folks are aware that there's this whole agenda to roll out a vaccine passport. It's already accelerated in the European Union. Now it's starting to be one of the talking points in the United States. Well, what we're doing with the Freedom Cell Network is creating an alternative network, an alternative market, an alternative economy of people that if it comes to the point where it's like you can't enter the grocery store because you don't have a green light on your vaccine passport, I'm not sure that'll happen wholeheartedly in the United States of America. Maybe it'll happen in certain jurisdictions like New York or California or Massachusetts, perhaps. I don't think it's going to happen here in Texas or Florida, for example. But the idea is that's where things are going, right? That's just the beginning of how this agenda gets rolled out. And so we want to create an environment where people can opt out of that. They can choose not to participate. They can say, if you're requiring a vaccine passport or any other number of controls, like a social credit score, for example, which is a reality in many places in this world, then we are just not going to participate because we've built our own network of people that are supporting one another. We're employing each other. We have entrepreneurial enterprises. We have trade amongst one another. And one of the visions that I see, a lot of this control paradigm is being carried out in what's called smart cities, right? And there are some benefits to technological advances and interconnectivity. But a lot of the people that are at the forefront of rolling this out are the same type of characters that have been pushing for global authoritarian governments for quite some time. And so one way that I see to circumvent that is through seasteads, is through intentional communities, and through uniting these free thinkers and innovators in a confederation of sorts, where we have trade routes established amongst ourselves. We have mutual defense compacts. We have certain standards and a constitution of our own that we honor and abide by. So that's kind of the bigger picture, what I'm hoping to see from this Freedom Cell Network. It started off just me and a group of 8 people that fell apart due to some internal differences, which is why dealing with conflict is really important and should be high on people's list of priorities when it comes to doing group dynamics or forming a new civilization. But there was a little bit of growth. My friend Derek Bros, he does the Conscious Resistance Network. He got the idea out to the world, turned into a global thing. Before 2019, we had about 1,000 people participating. And then when COVID-19 happened, more accurately, the government's response to COVID-19 started rolling out. A lot of people were quite alarmed with the totalitarian overreach that they experienced. And so they got involved with the Freedom Cell Network. We hosted an event called the Greater Reset, which is our response to the World Economic Forum's Great Reset. You can learn more at thegreaterreset.org. We're doing another one in May 24th. We're also doing a Decentralized, Distributed, and Disruptive Technology Summit. D3 Tech Summit is the website for that. That's April 24th and 25th. Whenever we did these events and kind of put this idea out that there's an alternative way to move society forward, or at least move our crew forward, the group grew from 10,000 to 20,000. So we're experiencing some pretty exponential growth. And I don't think there's any reason why we won't continue to grow to 100,000 or even 1 million people in a matter of a few years. So I just want to share with people that we have this social network that we've built. People are working together. There, you go to freedomcells.org, you can sign up on the website. You can put yourself on a map, although I would recommend not using your residence's address, but using a park down the street or a coffee shop down the street. And then you can see, chances are, if you live in a densely populated area, there's people in your area that are looking to link up, looking to go talk shop at a coffee house, looking to come over to your place and dig a garden in your backyard, go to the gun range together and just cooperate together. Because I know that not everyone on this call has the same views or same ideas, but I think that we can all agree that the way things are going in this world is not ideal. That's why people are motivated to experiment with these alternative forms of community. So I'd like you guys to consider joining and being a part of our community. There's a lot of really innovative and radical thinkers that are doing. They're not concerned with the problem, not focused on that, sharing articles online, researching this, that, and the other. They're focused on how can we work together with our fellow human beings to achieve common goals. So I want to invite you guys to participate. And if anybody has any questions or comments, I would love to get your feedback on that. And consider the group of 8 in your organizing, your seasteading work, some of the projects that you're working on. It really helps. There's also something called Sociocracy and Holocracy, which are similar means of organizing. And you can just kind of break things down into smaller groups, so it's easier to get ideas out. It's easier to put things in action. It doesn't become bureaucratic. Ideas don't get drowned out. And it's you're able to avoid differences when you can work together in those smaller groups. I'd say it in a nutshell.
Ronald had a question. So Ronald, go ahead and unmute yourself.
All right. Hello, everybody. I'm here from The Hague, the Netherlands. And we should talk about social political forms of government. And I wrote a paper for the World Conference Floating Solutions in Paving the Waves last year. And I like to point out, you can download it. I will put a link in it. I hope it works. No, it's not working. But otherwise, I give it to Carly. And it's about what I call the humancracy, not the humanocracy, but it's a new form of another form of how to work together. And I already thought I sent that to Anthony. And I think last year I sent it also to Carly, but I will do it again. And then you can distribute it to the other peoples, because it's how can we prevent that bullies or other guys come into a government? How can we prevent all the things we do not want? And how can we make it the things that we really want to do? How can we have the right persons on the right positions? And that's all about in my paper. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, I found your speech, so I can share that when I send the follow-up email to everyone about this event. And so our next question is Dominic. Go ahead, Dominic.
Yeah, so what I'm interested in is whether the Freedom Cell Network has legal people on board to kind of advise on how best should communities organize themselves in legal terms for mutual trade without falling foul of laws on business that potentially require people to participate in the systems they might be looking to not participate in, to escape from, because in many countries, once you engage in trade, you're required to register as a business, and whether there's people kind of advising on the best structures to minimize the mandatory participation.
Okay, that's a great question. So I myself operate a business. In fact, I just started a second business on Friday, an LLC specifically, right, in the inside game. But as a strategy, I like to promote the inside-outside game. So you have folks that participate within the system. It's definitely easier to build wealth if you are participating and complying with certain laws, although there's so much gray area and strategic write-offs and all that good stuff. But as far as outside the system goes, a wonderful strategy for outside the system participation is called Agarism, or revolutionary market anarchism. It's the idea that we should participate outside of the system and build competing systems known as counter-economics, counter-establishment economics. This was all iterated by a gentleman named Samuel Edward Konkin in the New Libertarian Manifesto. But that is the primary strategy of the Freedom Cell Network. It's building networks and infrastructure and commerce outside of the purview of the state. And I recognize that that's a challenge. Some people are full-on agorists. They do not pay taxes. They do not participate in the state whatsoever. Some people have one foot in this door, one foot in the other. But it's my hope that through strength in numbers, which is a key component of the Freedom Cell Network, it's what I was meditating on when I came up with this idea, because I know there's a lot of people that don't want to participate in the state, but they still do because they feel compelled to and they're afraid not to. The more people that we have, it strengthens our resolve to not participate. And if we start thinking big and with an eye towards future generations, because, you know, the enemies of liberty and these big centralizing institutions, the Council on Foreign Relations, Bilderberg Trilateral Commission, right? I don't want to sound conspiratorial, but there is most definitely a conspiracy to create a global totalitarian government, and it's been accelerated with the advent of technology in recent years. They are thinking generationally. So I think if we can plant the seeds now, if we can raise free children that don't set foot in government schools, that aren't indoctrinated, that have critical thinking skills, and they have networks and economies that they can inherit, then perhaps we can raise a generation of folks that never have to participate in the system altogether. Like my children, for example, don't have social security numbers. They're already all excited about entrepreneurship, and they're already tuned in to a community. They have friends that are part of our community as well. And it's my hope that they never have to comply with those institutions, those systems. So, but to answer your question, there are folks that are professionals that do have businesses, and there are people that are doing the inside-outside game that can advise on that. But the overall strategy is to have such a rush of people, such a sheer volume of people that are opting out and emboldened that we don't comply and we don't participate.
Okay, we have about 5 minutes left for this event. I'm going to put in the chat, the governance discussion will continue with our May event on May 8th. So I'll put a link to the Eventbrite in the chat so you can RSVP, make sure you get a spot for that. And then also we have a feedback form where you can share feedback about this event and also share ideas for what you want to see in future events. So I'll put both of those links in the chat. And we have 2 more questions. So if you could keep it short and sweet so that we can get to both of you, that would be great. Next is Alexis.
Hi. Out of curiosity, what about people who want to, like, you know, augment themselves or have their biology merged with technology? Are you taking that into consideration, especially, you know, people who are disabled? If they want that, I mean.
Sure. Yeah, I'm all about freedom. And I know that, you know, there's a lot of natural organic growth with technology and concepts that are discussed within the 4th Industrial Revolution. And by all means, if people want to engage in transhumanism or augment their body to benefit their lives and their quality life, I personally don't have a problem with that at all. I just am cautious and concerned about the acceleration of many of these technologies because I can see that it's kind of a con that's being rolled out here. A lot of these folks, like I said, they say that they're all about the environment and poverty, when in reality, it's this oligarch class that has been destroying the environment, and their policies and central banks and bailouts and manipulation of markets is putting people in poverty. So there's kind of a disconnect there. So I'm just more cautious and concerned about the rollout of something that you can see is being used as a means to the end of further control. But I like technology. I like smartphones and stuff. I use Amazon, even though Jeff Bezos doesn't align with my values. So it's all about that balance between convenience and liberty, and where people fall on that balance is different areas, and everyone has a right to whatever they want in life, as long as they don't violate other people's rights, in my opinion.
Also, what if the market is wrong?
About what?
You know, like it's wrong, as in like it makes a mistake and it screws everyone up.
That happens. We'll never live in a world without risk. People are infallible and make wrong decisions, and markets reflect that sometimes. But I think the less manipulation in a market, the more natural things can be, the more equilibrium there will be, the more constraints we remove, the closer we'll get to a market that is reflective of people's unique wants and needs.
Manupa, last question.
It's not a question, it's just an addition of value to what said. I've been reading about these concepts of swarm intelligence and emergence, where a certain set of beings act according to several simple set of rules. They create something bigger than themselves, such as examples are the murmurations by starlings. There are bird called starlings who makes patterns, and there are ant colonies which make stuff bigger than themselves. So I think the sea studying is also like this freedom cell network is also like that. It's a swarm intelligence. It could create greater stuff.
Yeah, that's a great observation. We like to say that, when you have an individual or you have a smaller group and they learn something about how to best organize a meeting or what's a good technology to reach consensus, make decisions, that group or individual then shares that information and intelligence with the rest of the network. And I like to point out that the cells in our body, or the cells in the network, are as healthy as the network as a whole, right? Just like the individual cell in your body, its health is contingent upon the health of the body, and the health of the body is contingent upon the health of the individual cells. So there's this synergy. If we communicate and we're open to feedback, there's a feedback mechanism we can tap into. I think it can really help us to accelerate our common goals. Well, cool. Well, thank you everyone for joining. This has been really illuminating and elucidating, and we've had quite a few people participating, and we've shared a lot of really good ideas. So it's really exciting to be part of this community that's out there innovating and creating a better world. You want to share anything before we wrap up, Carly?
Nope, just a reminder, please give us feedback. Let us know what you want from future events, and join our May discussion on free private cities, there were a lot of questions that came up during this discussion that I think we'll be able to address more thoroughly in May 8th. So thanks to everyone for coming.